Okay, so this is the first in a series of videos that I'm going to be doing on Twinmotion. Largely, these are just overview videos. This is just to get just enough to get you a sense of the program, and as it might be called for, I might be going further into the program and really get into depth how to create some amazing imagery. But for the most part, I wanted to do something just to get people up and running in this software. So in particular, this first one is just sort of a sweeping overview. Okay, so when you open up Twinmotion, the first thing that you're going to notice, as opposed to Revit or SketchUp or any other program, is the navigation system is very different. Okay, so it is going to be using the right mouse button. So I'm holding down the right mouse button to look around, and then it's going to use WASD to navigate. Okay, so wherever I'm looking, the camera is going to move. So A and D are going to move laterally. W and S are going to move backwards and forwards. So if I'm looking down, I'm going to hover up. If I'm moving forward, I'm going to move down to the ground plane. And this takes a little while getting used to, unless you've been playing video games your whole life, in which case it'll be second nature. But the navigation system is excellent. Get used to using this navigation system. Don't try and change what it does really well, because what Twin does remarkably well is create this sort of immersive design experience for you to work through. And this sort of first-person camera control system setup that they have is something to leverage. It works really well. Now the program itself has two side panels that are going to pop out, here and here. They are quick access, and largely I keep them closed because what I'm looking for with the software in particular is a lot of real estate. And what that allows me to do is have a lot of visual on the screen. Also, the formatting for this sort of nice wide field of view, sort of the 16:9 kind of aspect ratio, is really nice in my opinion to work in. So, panel on the left is my libraries, my Entourage, things like that I can bring in. On the right, I have two buttons. I have sort of my navigation button, what I'm seeing. So I've got time of day, which I can cycle through. So you're going to see the sun go up and down, lights automatically turn on, stars starting to show up in the sky, all these sort of amazing things that happen sort of immediately. Let's set that back to daytime. Next, I have speed. This is how quickly the camera is going to move. So if I'm interior on a building, I might have my speed set all the way down to a walking pace. By default, speed is set to a bike, so we're typically moving around 12 miles an hour, 13 miles an hour, something like that. If I have an enormous scene that I'm trying to navigate around on, then I'm going to switch this to a car where the camera's moving somewhere more around 30 miles per hour. We'll get into this a little bit later, but this is the different viewing options that we have, in terms of presentation mode, whether or not we are anchored down, all those kind of things. We have orthographic views, our default view setup, our clipping views, and then if I have my VR headset connected, I've got the setup so I can instantly and immediately go right into VR. And again, we'll get to all of those things a little bit later. On the right, this right panel are basically the objects in my scene. And if things start to bog down, I can also begin to look at scene statistics, how well the computer's behaving, or often I will pull up on this transform so I can see exactly where my objects are at, as well as the scale of the objects so I'm having to do any work in regards to that. So that's basically how this upper panel works. The lower panel is basically set up to work top down. So we have sort of this left, right, upper panel, and then top down from here. It starts with import, context, settings, the media. So this is where I'm creating content, and this is where I'm exporting the content that I've created. So the workflow is really this sort of top down. Everything is open. There aren't any modules or specific arrangements or orders that I have to do the tasks in. This is basically a great big living sandbox to play in as an architect. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so happy with how this software works, especially as an educator. To build this kind of design environment is really powerful for students. So moving through this as a process, let's just click the import button, and I'm going to grab a file that I've been working on for a while. This is actually a little bit dated in terms of the geometry of this file. It's actually a little bit more closed in than what this current file shows on the ends, but this is Thorn Crown Chapel by Faye Jones. And if you notice, this is modeled in Revit, so everything's going to come in as a mono material in terms of how Revit is currently exporting objects. It's hovering just a bit above the ground, so one of the first things that I want to do is grab the base, the root of my object. You can see here are all the sub-objects, but I'm just going to grab the base and use my widget to just pull that down so that it's on the ground plane. So if you notice this widget, I've got up, down, left, right, and rotate all active. The other things that I can do, I can go only to rotate and only to scale. But this base widget of move usually gives me just about everything I need in terms of placing things. So if you notice, this was built on the 0, 0, 0 point of the XYZ Cartesian coordinate system, and it's going to come in at roughly that same location inside of Twinmotion. Cool. So let's start applying some materials to this. So I'm just opening up the materials library, glass, two-sided glass, and I'm just going to start dragging and dropping my materials to my objects. Okay, so that's glass for the windows. Let's do a bit of not metals, but stones. To this. Now, as I start seeing these things, you know, this is undersized. Those really aren't stones, those are pebbles. But if I just use my eyedropper and select that material, I can scale that up. And let's do the same thing with this right here, also scaling that up. Now, coming from a program like Revit, how almost all of these softwares are going to work with the real-time engine, they are looking for materials. So everything that's the same material is going to get this material mapped to it. So you can notice I didn't have to drop the glass material on every single pane of glass. Everything that was labeled as a glass material inside of Revit received that material. So by the same token, if I want to take these wooden trusses, which are actually painted trusses, so I'm going to go in on those. One pass of dropping a material on those will paint all of them, which really matters, and we'll get to this in a bit, in terms of setting up your Revit file to work really quickly. So not in this video, but in a future video, we will get to the idea of how do you set these up, and how do you make edits to your Revit model to quickly allow you to put texture maps, different colors, things like that onto your Twinmotion file. So these trusses, again, it's a painted wood, so I'm just going to start by putting on that painted wall material, and then I can change the color of that, not to green, but let's get those sort of this nice warm brown that's in the chapel, something about like that, I think, if I remember correctly. And then I can take that same material, I can just apply it wherever that needs to go. And so that really, really quickly begins to map and create some of the basics. Now, as I'm working through this, as I'm going down my list, I know that my setting really isn't this. You know, this is in a forest. This is a small chapel in a forest. So this urban context really isn't what I'm looking for. So I could use this sort of mapping tool to grab a site. But again, for a project like this, it's really not even the right kind of approach, because it's not an urban project. This sort of city roads and map system isn't going to help me a lot. So what I really want to go to is down here, the next setting, right here to my location tab and simply change my background from city to, let's change this to countryside. Then I need to change my ground plane to something like a grassy ground. And then I'm already doing quite a bit better. Now, if I want exact topography, usually I'm pulling that in from the topography file on Revit or something similar to that. So I'm not going to worry about that just now, but again, that is coming in a later video, so we'll get there, right? But let's continue working a little bit on context. And so from here, once we have our basic setting in place, we need to start adding some entourage elements. And I can do that sort of with sort of a one-by-one sort of level of precision. So I can select a tree and just begin placing trees sort of one at a time, which as I get really adjacent to a building is sometimes a really nice way to do this. But I can also come in and just think larger context and use this tool called vegetation paint to do larger areas, thinking about like an entire forest. So to do something like that, just as, you know, again, the early learning method, I'm just going to drop that birch tree in. I'm going to set my diameter to paint a little bit larger, about a 40-foot diameter. Let's go even larger than that, about a 50-foot diameter. And I'm just going to paint a swatch right through here, kind of setting up this larger forest. So once I have that, I have this sort of painted vegetation number 6. And it says 6 because I've done this a couple of times now. I'm getting ready for this video. Maybe I want more than just birch trees in here. All that I need to do is start dragging, like let's throw in a couple of evergreens. And wherever I've painted, it's going to add those in. Let's add in, let's also put in an oak tree here as well. So if I add that oak tree in, it starts doing that and immediately starts populating all of that. When I have my vegetation selected, I can also change the density of either one of those, or I can go to my settings and change the growth on each one of them as well. So there's a lot of quick variables in terms of building a scene like this really, really quickly. Now, if I want to add in another set of painting tools, I need to simply deselect. And let's go back and let's start a brand new group of vegetation. So this is going to create vegetation 7 now. And in this case, let's go ahead and add in some grass. So again, sort of in the middle of a forest, so let's use this wild grass tool. Let's pull this diameter way down so I can paint with a little bit more precision. And let's just go ahead and start getting that grass working right here along this front entry area. Let's zoom in a little bit more, decrease the diameter so I can actually even get in here and paint sort of between columns. Just a shade smaller. Let's actually input a number here. Let's go 3 feet. Perfect. And I can come in with a really high level of precision now and just paint exactly where I want that to go. And again, if I want to change my density, I can come in and just increase that density to make that thicker or thinner based on what I need and also based on the performance of what I need that scene to do. Right, so let's add just a little bit more in right through here. And I can start building that scene up, again, with that really nice high level of precision right where I want things. So again, anytime I can go back and select those different groups of vegetation, add to or modify them as I'm working along. So the last part of this sort of quick overview is simply setting up some basic output ideas. Okay, so let's go ahead and collapse these two side panels, get this closer back to full view, and let's set up a couple of quick views to render here. So this next piece down is going to my media. So in this particular case, I would simply be going to image, and I would create an image. So this first image is going to be exactly what you see here. If I make some modifications, if I, I should be a little bit higher or a little bit lower, I can begin to set that up and reload, and it will recapture that image. I can create a few additional ones. So it's the second image. Let's go ahead and move the camera just to the inside here. Reload that, so it's going to update that. And let's do one more sort of a bird's eye view from up above. Looking down. Oh, and I can't leave those skylights like that for this view. That's terrible. Let's go ahead and drop that glass onto those as well. There we go. Much happier with that. Then let's go back into my media image, create a new image. And so now I have these three images. Should definitely name them really quickly. So let's call this exterior 1, interior 1, and bird. Cool. So I have these all set up, ready to go. In terms of doing output, if I go back to media, I can do the same technique to build presentations, to build videos or animation, panoramic images, all kinds of things. All of those get filtered through this last piece, which is the exporter. So from my image right here, if I want these files, I would simply select them. I can look at some basic settings for each one of those. And if I want to come in and do some very specific settings with each one of those, I could come in and click more. I could come in and modify the camera setup, depth of field, vignettes. I can change the weather for any particular image. Like let's say I wanted that to be a little bit cloudy and rainy for this one. Any of those things I can do for each specific image, right? And it's going to create those updates and hold them. I can also come in and underneath the format button, I can change my resolution for what that image is going to be. So for this purpose, we'll just keep that as the simple HD 1920 by 1080 format. I have all of those loaded right now, right here. So this is simply filtering across. Anything that I add to this, it's going to export. So now when I hit Start Export, I can just select my location that I want the export to happen in. And it's going to do that export for me. Again, the rendering engine creating stills from this is very fast. Once it starts, it should only take a few seconds to build each image. So right now, for all three of those renderings, about 14 seconds is all this is going to take. So these should already be populating here right off of my desktop. There's exterior 1 right there with the rain. Let's see if those fall in line. Exterior 2, interior. Those are actually from earlier. But the idea is that, of course, those things, they are already all exported, happen very, very quickly. So again, as a basic tool to launch into building images, to start exploring your design, start seeing materials, super, super fast, super impressive piece of software. We're going to be going into much more depth here over this series, but I wanted to create this first one simply to get you up and working and exploring what the potential of this software